Hey everyone, hope you're doing fine. I know you're all probably going stir crazy, as am I. Um, but I wanted to come on here for a little bit and get some stuff done with you guys based on our PowerPoint that we were talking about. You also have access to this PowerPoint on Google Classroom. So if I go too fast, you can just go back and get the notes, or you can obviously pause this video as well. I'm not really sure where we left off. I can't remember. My computer at school keeps up with it because I leave it open, but yeah, I don't have that here. So I know roughly where we ended. So I'm just going to pick up somewhere. We might have already gone over all this, but it doesn't necessarily hurt. I'm going to go through the PowerPoints, and if there's places where you have questions or if there's any questions that you have, you can just type them into the comments section after I post this on a Google Classroom. And then I will try and answer your questions as quick as I can. All right. Okay. So we were looking at key issue 3, I think, where we started. And so pause for a moment. If you hear dogs barking, I'm sorry, they're a mess. But key issue 3, I think, is where we ended up. I know we reviewed intensive versus extensive agriculture. So intensive agriculture or farming that is grown closer together, more productive with each unit of land, and extensive is more space because they're more spread out. So I know we got to this geographer, and y'all know I couldn't pronounce his name, so we just kept going. But he identified 11 main agricultural regions, plus an area where agriculture was non existent. So I know we got into developing countries and agriculture that is present in developing countries, and those 5 were pastoral nomadism, shifting cultivation, intensive subsistence, wet rice dominant, intensive subsistence, crops other than rice dominant, and then plantations. And then I said that we were going to get into those 5 continuing. So I think we're going to get into those 5 today, and then we will continue on. There are also 6 present in developed countries as well. Mixed crop and livestock, dairying, grain, ranching, Mediterranean, and then commercial gardening. All right, so make sure that you're still remembering the difference between developed and developing countries. And then kind of relating back to chapter 2 and chapter 3, kind of what those look like on a population pyramid and in regards to migration. So here's some maps that we can look at. The one at the top, let me get my little pointer thing right here. Okay. So the one at the top, right up here. Woo. Okay. So that's just looking at our climate regions that we have, because we know that dependent upon the climate region is really kind of the access that we have to agriculture itself. So we can't change climate. Climate does change itself, but we can't change that. So we kind of have to adapt to what the climate gives us in order to be able to farm. And this map down here you can look at a little bit later. But this gives you the difference between subsistence, which is this top area here, and then commercial agriculture down here. So these are those 4 to 5 things that we were talking about that are present in those 5 that the geographer established, and then these are the others down here, with plantation being at the bottom of commercial agriculture. Okay, so first we'll talk about plantation farming. And plantation farming is a large-scale monocropping of profitable products not able to be grown in the U.S. or in Europe. So we typically find this in tropical lowland periphery countries where they're going to focus more on crops like cotton, sugarcane, coffee, rubber. Yes, rubber is something that is farmed. Cocoa, bananas, tea, coconuts, and palm oil. Those are just some examples. So with this, you're going to potentially come into some problems with this type of agriculture. So, for example, you're going to come into some environmental problems and economic problems. Some environmental problems that you could come into are clearly you're not necessarily practicing crop rotation, because if you're just focusing on specific crops, then you're going to drain all the nutrients from that ground, and then you're going to end up being able to not farm that land for that specific crop anymore. Also, you're going to have some economic issues, okay? If you're just monopolizing on one type of crop, then you're not necessarily opening your farm up to potential revenue for any other products. Also, supply and demand shifts and changes, so they may not have a demand for a crop a certain year. So we could have some issues. Also, moving back to environmental, something can happen and you are not able to farm that crop, and so then you're kind of just out of luck. For example, you could have some type of famine or whatever, and you're not able to produce that crop. So there are many different issues that we could have with just this type of agriculture. Subsistence agriculture is categorized into 3 different ways. You've got shifting cultivation, you've got pastoral nomadism, and then intensive subsistence agriculture. Now, I know I'm throwing a lot of words at you, but we'll look into each one. And so these are some of our agricultural regions where you're going to have subsistence agriculture. If you're noticing that they're not necessarily places that are heavy in population, except for this area. So our blue places, you don't necessarily have a whole lot of agriculture because, frozen, desert, and this is some desert land, mountainous area as well. Shifting cultivation, you've got right here in these orange places, they're going to shift what they've got. And then finally, sedentary intensive agriculture right here. We'll talk about a little later. So pastoral nomadism, which is, we've seen right here with subsistence agriculture. Pastoral nomadism, what that is, obviously a definition, a form of subsistence agriculture based on the herding of domesticated animals. So we already talked a little bit about some of those domesticated animals and even got into the hearths of where those originated, and I know some of that was in your assignment from yesterday. But you've got various approaches combine some reliance on sedentary agriculture with the herding of livestock. So you've got some people that are obtaining grain from sedentary subsistence farmers. You've got a lot of women and children of a nomadic group that are tending to crops at a specific place. You've got nomads that are hiring workers in order to practice sedentary agriculture, and then you've also got some nomads that will remain in a place and cultivate the land only when they know that it's the rainy season. So they'll move there, cultivate that land, farm that land, be there during the rainy season, so that way they know that their crops will be yielded, and then they will move back. Okay. So where you're finding pastoral nomadism, that's in arid and semi-arid areas. So you're going to have animals like that we talked about right here, based on herding of domesticated animals. Those animals are going to be like camel, goats, sheep, cattle, in like northern Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia. And you've got these arid and semi-arid places where you're seeing specific times of rainfall. You've got the vocab word of transhumance, which is seasonal migrations from highlands to lowlands based on what type of season that you're getting and based on the time of year and the weather that you're getting in those specific times of year. Most nomads are being pressured into sedentary life as land is used for agriculture and mining, right? So making sure that they're moving into certain areas only because of agriculture and even the extraction of other resources as well. All right, yeah, here's an example. They're following the herd. Cool. We've got our lovely domesticated animals right here, and then you've got their living quarters in the back. All right, shifting cultivation. So it's characterized by 2 distinctive features, okay? So this is still looking at developing areas, okay? Not developed, developing, okay? So shifting cultivation. One feature with shifting cultivation is farmers clearing land for planting by slashing vegetation and burning the debris. So that is also known as slash and burn, okay? Not necessarily one of the greatest land clearing options, but if you're in a developing region, you don't really have a whole lot of options. Slash and burn is also really bad for the land and the soil because you're burning things. You're not able to use things. And you could even start what happened even in Australia. Obviously, that wasn't because of slash and burn, but you can still have something similar happen. Farmers grow crops on a cleared field only for a few years until the soil nutrients are depleted and then leave it fallow for many years so the soil can recover. So they'll stay in a certain area for a specific period of time, use it, only grow a specific crop on it or a specific amount of crops on it. They deplete the nutrients from it and then move somewhere else. And then they do the same thing, and then they may continue and they move back. So when they would move back, it could be as few years as 6 years later or even up to 20 years later, depending upon where they go next. Land ownership, traditionally the land is collectively owned by a village, and then today private individuals own the land, especially in Latin America. So it just depends on the region that you're in based on what the land ownership looks like. So this is kind of a small example of what you see with shifting cultivation, slash and burn, and so on. So we can see what the environment looks like in the background, and then we see that this person right here is burning what they've cleared out. Shifting cultivation was sustainable in the past because obviously there were smaller populations, more available land, so you had more options to move somewhere. And then the ability for them to go from one place to another, they didn't necessarily have to worry about competing for that land. And also lower agricultural density. Shifting cultivation, where you're going to see a lot of this slash and burn and shifting cultivation type is tropical rainforests like the Amazon, Central and West Africa, Southeast Asia. You're going to have a lot of crops like upland rice in Southeast Asia, maize, and don't ask me how to pronounce that, but millet and sorghum. This form of agriculture really occupies the largest percent of the world's land area, okay? But we've seen a decline because you've got people that are in developing countries now that are moving towards ranching and logging and becoming more profitable through those types of agriculture rather than shifting cultivation. You've got commercial agriculture being more profitable, people farming for businesses and farming for profit and sending to market. You've got a growing population, so you don't have as much area to move to, and less land in a specific area in the region of the world. You've got government policies and regulations that are actually prohibiting this in some places, and then just the fact that people have more technology now and access to technology, so they're not having to use these types of farming types. All right, so we've seen a change from 1985 to 1992 that people are starting to inhabit and use these places. And also, this is what the land looked like in 1985. It looks more plentiful. I don't think that's a word. Bountiful. I think that's what I was going for. And then 1992, we kind of see it slowly kind of being depleted. This will be the last slide that I get to before my time is up, and I got to get through it in a minute 15 seconds, so we're going to go really fast. Okay, so agriculture and developing regions. So you've got intensive subsistence farming, and this feeds most of the world's people, about 3/4 of the world's people who live in developing countries, only developing countries. So farmers work intensively to subsist on a parcel of land, so most of the work is done by hand with animals. Virtually all available land is used for production, and these are actually much smaller. These parcels of land are much smaller than everywhere else in the world, because obviously we know that humans can only go so far before you have to use machines. So an example of this would be like where you're going to find crops of wet rice, all right? In this process where rice is planted on a dry land and then moved to seedlings to a flooded field, okay? So this is where you're going to find that in a lot of your Asian areas, East, Southeast, and South Asia. Okay, so India, China, a lot of those places. It's super labor intensive, and it's one of the most important resources in Asia. This form of agriculture is practiced by the largest percentage of the world's people.